He spent 19 years watching the boy he loved become the man Rome feared. Not from a distance, from the same palace, the same dinner table, the same imperial campaigns in the frozen north. Marcus Aurelius, the most self-disciplined ruler in Roman history, had one catastrophic blind spot, and that blind spot had a name: Commodus. The son Marcus made co-emperor at 16, the boy he dragged to the front lines of the Danube Wars to toughen him, the young man who would eventually execute senators, rename Rome after himself, and declare himself the reincarnation of Hercules. His reign would be called one of the worst in Roman history, and his father saw all of it coming. Here's what nobody talks about. Marcus left a private journal. We call it Meditations. He never intended it to be published. It was a record of his own failures, his own internal battles, his own attempts to hold himself together. And buried inside those pages are passages that read, when you know the context, like a father quietly breaking apart. Stay with this video, because somewhere in the middle, we're going to read one of those passages. One that Marcus wrote while Commodus was already showing signs of what he would become, and it will land differently than anything you've read about Stoicism before. And by the end, you'll have a framework for the hardest thing any Stoic philosophy asks of you. What do you do when you cannot save the person you love most? To understand the tragedy, you have to understand what Marcus was building toward. He was born in 121 AD into a family with connections to the imperial court, but no guarantee of power. The Emperor Hadrian noticed him as a child, reportedly because of his unusual seriousness and honesty. He called the boy Verissimus, the most truthful one. Marcus spent his adolescence studying under the best Stoic teachers Rome had, including Epictetus's student Junius Rusticus, who handed him a copy of Epictetus's Discourses and told him to read it not as philosophy, but as medicine. Marcus took that seriously. By the time he became emperor in 161 AD, he had spent decades training his mind the way soldiers train their bodies, with discipline, repetition, and deliberate discomfort. He didn't want to be emperor. That detail matters. When Antoninus Pius, his adoptive father, died and Marcus assumed the throne, he immediately insisted on sharing power with his adoptive brother Lucius Verus, something Rome had never seen before. He wasn't grasping for control. He was a man who had spent his life trying to want less, not more. And into this life of disciplined restraint, in 161 AD, a son was born. Lucius Aurelius Commodus. The first thing Marcus did was write about gratitude in his private notes. He was grateful the boy was healthy. The second thing, history records, is that Marcus began, almost immediately, worrying about what wealth and imperial power might do to a child. In Meditations Book 1, Marcus spends the entire opening cataloging debts, not financial debts, but the human lessons he received from people who shaped him. His grandfather taught him gentleness. His father taught him modesty. His mother taught him piety and generosity. He names teachers, philosophers, emperors who mentored him. It is a list built on received wisdom, on the village that raised him. He understood that he had been shaped by others. What he struggled to accept was the limit of his own ability to shape his son. The signs came early. Ancient sources and the Historia Augusta, unreliable as it sometimes is, captures the flavor of contemporary accounts. Described Commodus as a child who showed flashes of cruelty toward his servants. There were stories of him ordering a bath slave thrown into a furnace because the water was too cold. Marcus dismissed or softened these accounts when he could. This is not unusual. This is what parents do. But here is the open loop I want you to hold in your mind. Historians have long debated whether Marcus actually knew how dark Commodus was going to become, or whether he was, in some fundamental way, choosing not to see it. By the time we get to 177 AD, the answer becomes harder to avoid, and it changes how you read every single page of Meditations. The Marcomannic Wars began in 166 AD, and they were the defining crisis of Marcus's reign. Germanic tribes crossed the Danube in numbers Rome hadn't faced in generations. Plague was already decimating the empire. Marcus, who had never wanted to be a military commander, spent the better part of a decade in the frozen marshes and forests of what is now Hungary and Austria, holding the northern frontier together through sheer will. He brought Commodus to the front in 172 or 173 AD, when the boy was around 11 or 12. This was deliberate. Marcus wanted his son to see real war, real consequence, real suffering, the antidote to the softness of palace life. But military historians who study this period note something ironic. The camps on the Danube, far from hardening Commodus, seem to have introduced him to the entertainments of army life. The gambling, the brutal spectacle, the sense that violence was power made visible. Marcus kept writing throughout. The entire text of Meditations was composed largely during these northern campaigns. We know this because he titles two sections among the Quadi on the Grand River, placing himself geographically in the middle of the war. He was emperor, general, philosopher, and father, all at once, and he was using his private journal to keep himself from falling apart under the weight. In Meditations Book 4, he writes, "Confine yourself to the present." In Book 5, "You have power over your mind, not outside events." These are not platitudes when you know where he was sitting as he wrote them. These are a man fighting against his own nature, his instinct to control outcomes, to fix people, to make the world conform to his values, because that instinct was failing him in the most personal way imaginable. In 177 AD, Marcus made the decision that historians still argue about. Commodus was 16 years old. Marcus named him co-emperor, and shortly after Augustus, the highest title Rome could bestow. He was making his son his official successor, publicly, irrevocably. Many in the Senate were disturbed. Cassius Dio, writing decades later, records the court's unease. Even people who were loyal to Marcus could see what Marcus seemed unable or unwilling to admit. Why did he do it? This is the question that unlocks everything. Marcus had the power to name a different successor. He had capable generals, trusted advisors, men of proven character. The Stoic tradition he followed, the tradition of Epictetus, who had been a slave and had no dynastic ambitions, had nothing in it that required biological inheritance of power. So why Commodus? The most honest answer is, because he was his son. Because love distorts even the most disciplined mind. There's a passage in Meditations, Book 6, Section 30, that takes on a completely different weight once you understand what was happening in 177 AD. Marcus writes, "Nowhere can man find a quieter or more untroubled retreat than in his own soul." He is not writing about peace. He is writing about a man who has run out of external solutions and is forcing himself to look inward. He is describing the last resort of a person who cannot fix what is happening in front of him. Marcus died on March 17th, 180 AD in Vindobona, present-day Vienna, while still on campaign. He was 58 years old, and he had been ill for some time. The ancient sources disagree on the exact cause, but the most consistent accounts describe a slow decline from what sounds like the plague that had been circulating for over a decade. He died on the frontier in a tent with Commodus present. What happened next was almost immediate. Commodus negotiated a peace with the Germanic tribes that Marcus had refused to accept, a peace that abandoned most of what Marcus had bled for over 15 years. Then he returned to Rome, because Rome had arenas, and arenas had gladiators, and Commodus wanted to fight in them personally. Not watch, fight. He was 19 years old, and he was already unrecognizable as the boy Marcus had hoped to shape. By 182 AD, just 2 years after Marcus's death, Commodus had survived an assassination attempt organized by his own sister Lucilla. He responded by executing her and dozens of senators. The paranoia accelerated from there. He renamed the months of the year after his own titles. He renamed Rome itself, Colonia Lucia Annia Commodiana. He appeared in the arena dressed as Hercules, fighting maimed opponents and calling himself the god incarnate. Cassius Dio, who witnessed some of this as a senator, writes with barely concealed horror. Now here is the question that should be haunting you by now, because it haunted the ancient world too. How did Marcus not see this coming? And more uncomfortably, did he see it and act anyway? Cassius Dio records something that cuts straight to the heart of this. He writes that toward the end of Marcus's life, people close to the emperor openly questioned whether Commodus was truly Marcus's biological son, suggesting his mother Faustina had taken a gladiator as a lover. Marcus never addressed these rumors publicly, but privately he kept Faustina close, honored her after her death, and named Commodus his heir regardless. The rumors about Faustina are almost certainly false. They have the flavor of later propaganda spread by people who wanted to distance the good emperor from his terrible son. But what the rumors reveal is the depth of the ancient world's bewilderment. How could the man who wrote "Waste no more time arguing about what a good man should be one, produce this?" The answer the gossips reached for was, he didn't. The answer history forces on us is harder. He did, and he couldn't stop it. This is the Minute 9 moment I promised you. What we're about to get into is not about Marcus's failure as a historical curiosity. It's about what his private writings reveal, what he was actually trying to work through in meditations, and why it is directly, uncomfortably relevant to you if you have ever loved someone whose choices you could not control. The framework he was building is not just philosophy, it is survival. And it starts with one of the hardest ideas in Stoic thought. The Stoic distinction between what is up to us and what is not up to us is usually taught as a simple sorting exercise. Your thoughts, your reactions, your choices, up to you. The weather, other people's behavior, outcomes in the world, not up to you. Epictetus, in the very first line of his Enchiridion, states this as the foundational principle of all Stoic practice. Marcus had it memorized. He had been living by it for 40 years. And yet, in Meditations Book 9, Section 3, Marcus writes something that reveals the fracture in his application of this principle. Do not indulge in dreams of what you have not got, but count up the chief of the blessings you have, and then thankfully remember how eagerly you would have sought them if they had not been yours. He is reminding himself to be grateful for what he has. This is a man fighting the fantasy that things could be different, that Commodus could still become what he had hoped. The Stoics had a specific technique for exactly this kind of struggle. They called it amor fati, love of fate. In the Latinized version Marcus would have known. Not passive resignation, not pretending bad things are good, but a radical acceptance of reality as it actually is, combined with the continued commitment to act well within that reality. Marcus returns to this idea again and again throughout Meditations, which tells us he was not arriving at it naturally. He was fighting his way toward it. Here is the honest historical verdict. Marcus Aurelius failed his son by overprotecting him, by elevating him, by refusing until it was too late to impose real consequences on Commodus's worst impulses. He was a man of extraordinary self-discipline who lacked the emotional distance to apply that discipline to the relationship that mattered most to him. This is not a condemnation. This is a mirror. Because most of us, given the same situation, would fail in exactly the same way. Commodus was eventually assassinated on December 31st, 192 AD, strangled in his bath by a wrestler named Narcissus after a poisoning attempt failed. The conspiracy included his own mistress, Marcia, and his chamberlain. He was 31 years old. His reign lasted 12 years. The Senate declared him an enemy of the state and attempted to erase his name from public monuments. They called the period of his rule a descent into rust and iron after an age of gold. The Senate's verdict on Commodus was unambiguous. Their verdict on Marcus, by contrast, was near deification. He was declared divus, divine, and worshipped as a god-emperor. Rome held both judgments simultaneously because it had to. The father was the best of them, the son was the worst of them, and the same blood ran through both. This is the Minute 14 revelation I promised. The thing about Marcus Aurelius that almost no one says out loud: Meditations is not a success manual, it is a failure journal. It is the private record of a man who fell short of his own ideals, who loved imperfectly, who made choices that cost others dearly, and who kept getting up every morning and trying again anyway. That is not a lesser thing. That might be the most important thing. When Marcus writes in Book 2, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." He is not writing it because he has achieved this. He is writing it because he desperately needs to believe it. There is a difference, and understanding that difference is what separates reading Meditations as inspiration from reading it as medicine. But what does this mean for you, watching this in 2026? Because we need to cross from ancient Rome into your actual life now, and this crossing matters more than anything else in this video. The question Marcus's story raises is not abstract. It is this. What do you do when someone you love is making choices that are destroying them and you cannot stop it? Maybe it's a child who has chosen a path you know leads nowhere good. Maybe it's a parent whose drinking has crossed a line. Maybe it's a partner you have watched make the same self-destructive choice 15 times, and each time you have tried to intervene, tried to fix it, tried to be the thing that saves them, and they are still making it. You know this feeling. The helplessness of it is specific. It has a texture. It sits in your chest like stone. The first thing Marcus's story teaches us, the hard lesson, not the comfortable one, is that love without limits is not wisdom. It is the failure of wisdom. Marcus loved Commodus too much to impose the consequences that might have changed Commodus's trajectory. We do the same thing. We soften the blow. We make excuses. We give one more chance. And each time we do, we are not helping. We are preventing the natural consequence that is the only real teacher. The second modern situation this maps onto is subtler. It is the person who watches a friend, a sibling, a partner make a choice that is not catastrophic, just slowly, consistently diminishing. The person who never pursues what they actually want. The partner who settles, again and again, for less than they're capable of. The friend who is brilliant and does nothing with it. You want to shake them. You have tried talking to them. Nothing changes. This is Marcus on the Danube, watching Commodus be fascinated by the wrong things and not knowing how to redirect it. Epictetus, whose discourses Marcus read and reread, was brutally clear on this point in a way that Marcus seems to have found easier to admire than to live. Epictetus writes in Discourses Book 2, "Seek not that the things which happen should happen as you wish, but wish the things which happen to be as they are, and you will have a tranquil flow of life." Notice he says nothing about giving up. He says change what you wish for, not what you do. Here is the actionable technique that comes directly out of this, out of both the Stoic texts and out of what Marcus failed to do with Commodus. It is called the circle of influence audit, and it is built on the dichotomy of control. Take a piece of paper and draw 2 circles, a small one inside a larger one. In the small inner circle, write everything about this person's situation that you can actually affect. Your own words, your own boundaries, your own presence or absence, your own modeled behavior. In the outer circle, write everything you cannot control, their choices, their emotions, their timeline, their ultimate outcome. Most people who are in pain over someone they love have their attention almost entirely in the outer circle. They are spending their energy on the uncontrollable, rehearsing arguments, imagining interventions, calculating what they should have said differently. The Stoic move, the Marcus Aurelius move, even when he failed to make it consistently, is to redirect all of that energy back into the inner circle. Not because you stop caring, but because that is the only place your caring can actually do anything. There's a crucial distinction that modern psychology and Stoicism agree on, and it is this. You can be fully present to someone, you can love them completely, you can make your own values visible through your own behavior, and you cannot make them choose anything. Presence is in your circle. Outcome is not. Marcus was present with Commodus for 19 years. He modeled virtue, patience, discipline, justice at the highest possible level, and Commodus chose differently. That is not evidence that Marcus's presence was worthless. It is evidence that presence and control are not the same thing. The grief in this is real. Let's not minimize it. If you have been through this with someone you love, you know that accepting the limits of your influence is not a relief, it is a loss. It feels like giving up. It feels like you are abandoning them. The Stoics had a word for the discipline of accepting this, ascesis, practice, training, the deliberate exercise of a hard capacity. It is not one insight you arrive at. It is something you practice every single day, the way Marcus practiced it in his journal on the banks of the Danube, knowing that Commodus was already slipping away. In Meditations, Book 11, Section 1, Marcus writes, "The rational soul is one that turns its back on itself, moves itself where it will, shapes itself as it will." He is writing about his own soul, not Commodus's. And this is the final pivot of the whole Stoic argument. The only soul you have real jurisdiction over is yours, not as a consolation prize, as the actual domain of freedom that no one can take from you. Here is the journaling prompt I want to leave you with. It comes from a synthesis of what Meditations actually asks of you and what Marcus's failure with Commodus reveals. Write this down somewhere private, somewhere honest. The prompt is, who in my life am I trying to save, and what am I doing to myself in the attempt? Not whether you should stop caring, not whether they deserve your effort, but what is the cost of focusing on their inner circle instead of yours? And what would change in your own life if you redirected that energy? Sit with that. Don't answer it quickly. The people who answer it quickly are usually the ones who haven't actually looked at it yet. Marcus Aurelius spent 20 years sitting with his version of that question and arriving at incomplete answers. That's not a failure of the philosophy. That's what the philosophy actually looks like when a real human being is trying to live it. There's one more thing the historical record gives us, and it is the most quietly devastating detail in this entire story. In Meditations Book 1, in that long opening list of gratitudes, the teachers, the models, the people who shaped him, Marcus does not mention Commodus, not once. He mentions his biological father, whom he barely knew. He mentions his adoptive father, Antoninus. He mentions his grandfather, his mother, his tutors. He does not mention his son. Whether this was deliberate or simply an artifact of when Book 1 was written, scholars still debate, but the absence is there in the text for anyone who wants to see it. What that silence might mean, whether it was grief, shame, protective distance, or simply the limitation of a father who couldn't find the words, we cannot know. What we can know is that Marcus Aurelius was not a man who omitted things carelessly. He was the most deliberate writer of his era, a man who crossed out and rewrote and agonized over private notes that no one was ever supposed to read. The absence of Commodus in Book 1 is a choice, and choices, as the Stoics knew better than anyone, always mean something. Marcus Aurelius died having failed to save his son, having given Rome the worst emperor it would know for a century, and having left behind a book that has outlasted every monument, every triumph, every conquest of his reign. A private book, a failure journal, a record of a man refusing to stop trying even when trying wasn't enough. That is his legacy, not the victories, the refusal to give up on himself even when he couldn't save everyone else. If you take one thing from this video, let it be this: the Stoic wisdom in Meditations is not the wisdom of someone who figured it out. It is the wisdom of someone who kept failing and kept writing anyway. Marcus Aurelius is not an advertisement for Stoic perfection. He is proof that the practice is worth doing even when, especially when, you cannot see the results you hoped for. The next video on this channel continues this thread. We're going to look at Seneca, who preached Stoic simplicity while amassing one of the largest fortunes in Rome, and what his letters to Lucilius reveal about the gap between philosophy and practice in a life under pressure. If Marcus showed us the limits of influence over others, Seneca shows us the limits of influence over ourselves. Subscribe if you want to be there when that drops. And in the meantime, go find your two circles. Start with what's actually yours.